All right, Philip, thank you so much for recording with me today. I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you about your financial journey. And I just wanted to start by asking, what is your earliest memory of money?
My earliest memory of money was probably around junior high. My family, my parents, they really didn't share much about money with us or their financial concerns, our ups and downs financially through the years. But around junior high, we went through sort of a downturn. My dad's business kind of went through a bankruptcy, and we had to move into a apartment. I believe it was somehow like subsidized apartment housing or something. And so I was faced sort of with like the realities of our financial life a little more in my face, even though they didn't talk about it with me. I knew that we didn't have a lot. We downsized our car. I could just tell like things weren't great, you know. But my parents were they loved us, obviously me and my sister, and so they I think did their best to shield us from that. That was their sort of default reaction from all this stress and all this financial trauma. Their reaction was to basically act like for us it wasn't there. Um, and I know they did that out of love, but sometimes I feel like I wish they would allow me to participate in that a little bit more because I feel like money, it felt scarce. It felt like there was a little bit of need and want in our life, but I had no context for it. And so it wasn't a lesson learned. It was just like almost like sitting in fear or sitting in loss. But there was nothing. I don't know. I felt like I was kind of learning out of it. Does that make sense? Because they
Definitely,
weren't willing.
yeah.
They weren't willing to share it with me.
hmm So you could tell there was a change, obviously, because you guys went from one lifestyle to something else.
That's right. We went from having a lot. My dad having a business, successful um, family businesses as well. In fact, it was the family business that kind of went under, that dragged him down in his own business. And so we moved towns, a lot of downsizing houses and just things. And I could just tell, we didn't have as much. We still had a lot of love in our family, which was great, and it's all you need as a kid. But that was kind of my first, I guess, lesson was that it's not everything's perfect, and you can lose things. You can lose money,
hmm
or it can escape you, and your life can change because of it.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a really early time to experience that lesson. So outside of like the what you could see on the outside, did you experience anything internally um, as this was going on with you and your family? You said there was a lot of love there, so that probably definitely helped
Yeah.
shield a little bit. But outside of that, did it affect your social life or anything internal that you could speak about?
Yeah. We had this car called a Granada. I'm not sure who made it, Chevy or Ford or whatever. I think it was a Ford, a Granada. What an awful sounding car name. And it looked about like it sounded. And if we came to a stop in it, it would shut off, and then they would have trouble cranking it back up again. So my parents would always sort of like roll me up to school, like, and basically like jump out, open the door and kind of like jump out so we don't have to slow this thing down.
Mhm.
Believe me, I didn't want people seeing me in this car anyway. But so yes, there was a little embarrassment from sort of the downsizing. Um, there was, a little bit of discomfort. But again, I knew my folks loved me and they took care of me, and we had the basics. And so um it was, I also remember that Christmas, I found, um, all the parents out there, cover your kids' ears, but I found out about Santa Claus that summer because I found the stash of toys that Santa Claus was going to, I mean, deliver underneath my parents, underneath their sink, and it was like the smallest like amount of Christmas toys I'd ever received in my life. Like it could fit in like a Walmart bag.
Mm.
And at first I was like, oh, this is cool. There's probably more. And then Christmas morning, like that was it. And so, and that was a little humbling. That was a little bit of, because the Christmas before it was just like a new bike, a bunch of stuff, big tree, like the whole shebang, the picture perfect. So I really felt that the difference, and it was a little disappointment, but it wasn't traumatic or anything for me, luckily.
Mhm.
It was humbling though, and it almost like put me on my parents' side. Like, you know what I mean? Like I had empathy toward them in this situation. I felt like, all right, now we're in it as a family. It's not just like my parents taking care of me anymore. It's like now we're this family who's like got to support each other and got to help each other and we got to make this work together. That's the emotion I feel like it gave me, was sort of a little bit of a sadness at the loss of safety and not safety, security and excess, but I feel like it brought us together more.
Yeah. Did you have or try to bring up the conversation with your family or with your parents about what was going on? I know you shared that they weren't really forthcoming with any information, but did you ask them like what was going on?
I didn't really ask my parents that much about what was going on. It was a real traumatic time for our family. We had just my dad had just also lost some family members to sickness, and so we had this bankruptcy deal, and so I was just sort of like just trying to um, kind of go along to get along. I guess that's a bad way of saying it, but like just kind of be the quiet guy in the room and just kind of help them make everything smooth. Whenever things get stressful, I tend to be the one in our family, and even still today in my own family, to try to I guess calm things down or avoid as much conflict and stress as possible. And so that was probably my default at that time, was just quietly go play by myself, or find a buddy or something, and kind of tuck away. So those were my. But yeah, my parents, they didn't share much about it. They tried to shield me from it, although I kind of knew what was going on a little bit.
Hmm. And that's interesting because I know, like, at that age, like, especially preteen, teenagers, they're kind of selfish. And so, you would think for some, maybe some would have become angry about their new situation coming from one lifestyle going to another. But you definitely, like you said, you were patient, not patient, but you're understanding, and tried to not add to your parents' stress.
Right.
So that's awesome.
Another factor here was that my dad was an entrepreneur. So he was a CPA, and he had his own practice. And even through the bankruptcy of the associated business, he was able to maintain his CPA practice, move it to a new town. So he did lose some clients and start picking up some new ones. But I saw my dad sort of take ownership of this situation. Something had happened to him, that didn't really that he didn't necessarily cause himself, but it affected him and sort of brought the whole ship down. But instead of wallowing in that or sort of staying in that place, I saw my dad uh, take charge of the situation and fix it. So as an entrepreneur, I saw him be able to pull some levers that maybe if he had just been looking for another job, and that at that point, he may not have been able to pull those levers as fast. And so maybe that gave me confidence that I knew my dad would like figure this out, and my parents together, because my mom was obviously like very supportive, and she also had jobs and taught through that time. But I just always knew like my dad was very resourceful, and he could kind of figure it out, and we'd find our way back. And that is the story. Ultimately, he did. And by the time I was a freshman, sophomore in high school, he had really righted the ship. So he took us from that subsidized apartment lifestyle to one of the nicer houses in town. And if you look at it in terms of real estate, um, he really took us, in a 4 or 5 year period there, from not having much to really building back up to where we kind of were. So it was really cool to see that. So that's part of the story too, is that it's kind of I was confident in my dad, and also saw the power of entrepreneurship, be able to pull those levers fast and fix things, um, and take charge, and sort of take ownership.
Yeah. So on the outside, you did see a little bit of change, but and then as the person that you weren't a child to like really make a fuss. But were there any other ways that you maybe tried to help your dad or your family through this time? Like, did you like pick up on like a job or anything like that? I know you said you were pretty young when it initially happened, but
Yeah. By the time I could get a job, I did. I was excited to get a job at 13, 14. But by that point, they had mostly righted the ship. But I did try to avoid asking my parents too much for money, and I wanted my own money. It was less about wanting to burden them, and it was more about just wanting sort of to own my own life and be an independent person, and not having someone tell me what I wanted. Sorry, not having someone tell me what I needed to do with my money. And so because I wanted to do things. I wanted to rent video games or buy you know a big gulp at the convenience store and just use my own money to do it, not have someone tell me yay or nay. So I did pick up a job at around 13, 14, mopping the floors at a daycare at my church after hours, and also a bagged groceries at at the local grocery store. And I also, during that time, started my lawn mowing business. So I had a little lawn mowing business through my like late junior high, early high school time. So,
okay.
so I guess I did help out the family a little bit by just sort of becoming a little more self-sufficient myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what was your first job?
I think it was the mopping job. So
Mm-hmm.
I mopped floors at the daycare. All right. My first job was mopping floors at the daycare after hours. So I'd go and mop it every night. And I think I got paid $100 a week for that job.
Yeah. How did it feel like making your own money and really becoming self-sufficient? Like what was your feeling when you got that first paycheck?
When I got that first paycheck, I felt great. I felt like I had earned something. I felt like I was successful, part of our family, or part of our community, a contributing member. And so I was excited to sort of make a plan for that money, save some of it, spend some of it. Had some ideas to spend it for sure, and just to have responsibility and be seen as sort of a productive member of our church. It was a small town; it was 1,100 people in the town, and so um, if you weren't doing something productive, people picked up on it pretty quick, and so they could. My peers, my parents, my teachers, my Sunday school teachers, they all could see like I was contributing, and that felt good, and they would encourage me in that. And so having that first gig was a lot of fun. It was kind of spooky being up at a church at night, though. I'll tell you that. It was one of the scariest jobs I've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
Lights are all off. I'm going there by myself, um, and but it was cool. It was good to have that job and to be making some money, bringing in some money. So shortly after that, I opened up my first savings account.
Yeah, and I heard you mention that. So, how did you know or learn about saving and how important it is? I know a lot of kids at that age. You mentioned your dad was a CPA or
Yeah.
is a CPA.
Yeah.
Um, but where did you learn about saving and like managing your money in general?
Yeah. I learned about savings, I think, from my dad, who had a relationship with the one bank in town. And so one day he took me up there and helped me open up what was at the time considered a passbook savings account. And so you open up a savings account, you can stash your money in there and make deposits. And they give you this little book, so you can kind of write down, where you're at with your savings. A little black book. It was really cool. So I felt responsible with the job, then I felt responsible with this financial account, and seeing the balance in my account was encouraging, and I enjoyed the feeling of seeing that go up and saving my money, and the things I would get to spend it on. So enjoyed having, um, yeah, that first savings account. That was big. That was not naturally a saver, but having that book, the little pass book, sort of gamified it for me. And that was enough, I guess, to kind of encourage me to kind of see that number go up and continue contributing and go up to the bank. And the teller was excited to see me, and helped me make my deposit, and I learned about banking, and it was a cool experience. Yeah.
Hmm. Did you have any savings goals, or were you just saving just to save?
I was just saving just to save at the time. In fact, that probably didn't last very long. Um, I, as you know, as soon as I needed a new video game or something new, I would, blow the money on that. But then I would work to build it back up again. But at the time, no, I didn't have any good savings goals to attach it to, and so it was at the time it was just about, you know, um, making money and having spending cash, and so that account allowed me to do that. And I did sort of learn though that I needed a why. I needed, a reason for me to keep that money in there. Otherwise, I was just going to spend it because I wanted to do stuff. I wanted to buy stuff and spend that money. And so because there wasn't really a why attached to saving more, I saw no reason to keep it in there, so I would save it, but then I would spend it right, I would drain the account regularly, because I didn't necessarily have a big goal.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Like, what would you say? How would you sum up like what you learned from your experience up until that point? You just mentioned that you
Yeah.
learned that you needed a why for your savings, and
Yeah.
you also mentioned earlier about learning that you can go from one lifestyle to another and how quickly things could change. But anything else that you could share?
Some of the things I learned through that process was one, which I think is important, is just being comfortable with like having a bank account, having a savings account, and going and talking to a financial institution. That's part of like learning to be a mature financial adult, is learning to have a relationship with an institution like a bank and being comfortable talking to them, understanding sort of the financial products that they have and making use of them and being confident through that process. And so for one, it was really great to exercise sort of that confidence in working with a financial institution and not being intimidated, not being scared, and being comfortable sort of going up there and saving my money and being in the process of like contributing to my future in some way, like sort of exercising uh, that savings habit of once I earn it, get in there. Because I did sort of start to realize like if I just earned the money and kept it in my pocket, I was gonna spend it way faster than, let's say I earned it and then I ran up there really quick and I would save maybe 80% of it, and put and stash away that. But then I would keep some in my pocket and say, like, okay, this is the part I'm gonna spend. And so I quickly realized like just by having the account, it sets me up for a little bit of success because I'm naturally going to go up there and put a little bit. I'm going to put something in there, and if I didn't have the account at all, well, then where would it go? It would just go out the door really quickly. So having the account, I've learned, is almost like half the battle. And it's this separate place because once you put it in there, then it's hard to get it out, right? You got to go back to the bank to get it out, and so it creates this natural friction that makes it less likely that you'll spend your money. But ultimately, I would always end up draining that account because I didn't have a bigger goal, like a car or college savings or a big, bike or a big trip or anything that I was really attaching it to. It was a spending account really at the end of the day. But it did prevent me from spending overly frivolously, I guess, and sort of exercising my initial sort of savings habits, which I think are healthy for anyone to kind of pick up on or learn.
Absolutely, for sure. And like you said, the biggest step is having an account to put that money in.
Yep.
So were you making like cash at this time? I guess you were getting paid. You weren't, the option for direct deposit wasn't there yet, but it's good that you still develop that habit to go to the bank and make those deposits yourself.
Yeah, the whole thing was very manual.
Mhm.
I had no direct deposit at the time. It was uh, it was cash from my lawn mowing business, or occasional checks. It was checks from the church, and it was checks from the grocery store. and sometimes tips. Actually, there are really good tips in at grocery stores if you're the bagger and you carry the groceries out to the old ladies in their cars. It's you can make some good tips that way. But yeah, it was mostly a cash situation where I was depositing checks or cash into that savings account. So it's very manual. And so I probably just if I have to think about it, I probably ended up depositing a lot of the checks and spending quickly a lot of the cash that I would earn. So I kind of realized the difference between the two, in that um, cash being a little more liquid than the check itself could be spent much more easy than signing the back of the check and convincing a convenience store or grocery store to cash it for you really quick. But yeah, that's where the money was going.
Okay. So, coming up and like coming out of the situation, you said by the time you were a junior or freshman, sophomore, things started getting a little better in the household. Your father was able to turn things around, and like you said, you mentioned you moved into a nicer part of town, into a nicer home. So, after all of that happened, what was life kind of like? Probably around the same time you had the job, you got in the job. Okay. Um, so yeah, I guess from that point into becoming a young adult, what would you say your experiences were?
Yeah, so I would say my experiences post early high school there, when things started to turn around nicely for my family and I was getting jobs. I was starting the lawn mowing business, bringing in some cash. Um, I sort of existed in that space for the rest of my high school, experience. Parents still didn't really share much about money or talk about it. I was earning my own on the side for my spending. Occasionally, I would bum money off my parents still, though, and I think it was more toward the end of my high school career where I was starting to look at scholarships and school, going off to college, when money sort of crept back into my life and it became important again, because um, I did have expenses for college that I was going to have to meet. And so luckily, I was top 5% of my class. And so I was able to get tuition paid for at state universities. And so I took advantage of that, but it wasn't a full ride. I still had to pay for some room and board and books and things like that. And so ultimately, I decided to take a student loan out, along with some. I qualified, I think, for some grants, and so went into college, into debt. So that was a new experience. In college, I tried not to work too much because I wanted to just focus on the studies. I did have some jobs through college, though, to provide a little extra spending money. And so I did the student loan thing throughout college. This was in the mid 90s, late 90s. So college wasn't as expensive as it is today. But, um, I think I ended up in total with around $30,000 of student loans when I finished up university. And so went into my accounting career with some student loan debt. Also got into a little bit of credit card debt through college. I picked up my first credit card in college. Had no idea how to use it or what to do with it, and had even talked to my parents about the fact that I had gotten one. Um, Again, this goes back to the sort of the just do it and don't talk about it, sort of vibe that I had going on in my life financially. Um, and so, yeah, ended up leaving school with the student loan debt and the credit card debt, and then went out and purchased a brand new vehicle as soon as I got my first job. And so I had a car loan too. So I had three big loans, a nice apartment, and a new job when I left university.
Mm-hmm. So what was that planning like for you even before you got to college? Like, was it a given that you were going to college? I've spoken to some people who like that wasn't a conversation. And when it came to taking out student loans, did you understand what that meant, being that you really didn't understand the credit cards and everything like that? But did you understand what having a loan meant, and that it needed to be paid back and things like that?
So both of my parents went to university, and so it was always the expectation that I would go as well. I think I hinted at looking at the Army or Marines, but I really wanted to play college football. And so after my senior year, a university invited me to come walk on as a preferred walk on to play football for my first year. And so that sealed the deal. I knew I was going to go to university right after that. I did really well in high school academically as well. And so I just kind of always knew I'd end up at university. I went to a school an hour away from my house, went to Louisiana Tech University, great school, small school, with a good engineering program and a good accounting program. And, like I said, I didn't have all the funds. My parents didn't save for my college. Um, they were willing to pay for my college, I think, had I asked them to, but they were comfortable at the time with the grants and the scholarships and the student loans, being that I wasn't borrowing the entire amount. I think they were comfortable with that, but they weren't going to pay it back. I took responsibility for the payback. And I was glad to do that. At the time, interest rates were very comfortable in the late 90s. And so when I was taking these loans out, I did take a look at interest rates to kind of understand that a little bit. But to be honest with you, I really didn't understand the full ramifications of what the student loan was or what it meant, and certainly didn't realize how powerful the loan is in terms of repayment and not being able to never get out of it. I don't think I fully understood that you always had to pay your student loans back no matter what. Because my parents had been through a negative financial situation with debt. I was somewhat aware of that happening, but I don't know. I guess I was just comfortable with the smaller amount because it was just the room and board amount I was borrowing. I guess I felt a little more comfortable, yeah.
So you mentioned you went into accounting and your dad was a CPA. Did you know at an early age that you were going to go into that career field? Like, was that a passion of yours, or did you just go into it because your dad was a CPA?
So I chose accounting as my um, as my major because I got a business scholarship. I think I got in addition to my tuition getting paid for, I got this $1,000 business school scholarship. It was basically a throwaway amount considering all that I was spending on college. But for whatever reason, that $1,000 convinced me that I needed to have a business major. My dad was a CPA accountant, so I just chose that, and he was like, "You won't regret it. That's a money choice. You can do anything you want with it. Just go get that, and then you'll be set." I kind of wish I had tried engineering first. It was such a good engineering school at Tech, and making my own path, making my own way was very important to me. I love my dad. I respect him, but I don't love accounting like he loves accounting, and I knew that. And so when I was going to school, I was worried that I wouldn't love it enough. Ultimately, that's true. I didn't love it enough, but I was good at it. And so when I took my first accounting class, I think I aced it and set the curve and upset everyone in the class by making a 110 on it or whatever. And it was apparent, like, okay, you're really good. This is in the blood. Like, you can speak the accounting language and do it. So yeah, I stuck with accounting all through college. Ended up doing the 5-year program, which qualifies you at the time to take the CPA exam. So I was there for 5 years and was CPA ready, and I also had a job at a public accounting firm whenever I left university. So I was good to go. It ended up being a really safe, strong choice for me in the short term.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So did you love that job, that first job after that you got after college, or what was that experience like working in a field that you weren't as passionate about? When did you
Right.
learn that you weren't passionate about that? I know you said you kind of hoped you did a little more of the engineering. So when did you realize maybe accounting isn't it for me?
So I started to realize accounting really wasn't for me at my senior year and certainly by my graduate year. The courses had gotten tougher, the language had gotten more difficult, and so the concepts just more difficult. And I just did not want to put the time or energy into studying it, to knowing it, to really absorbing it. I started seeing classmates outperform me, do better than me, and as someone who's fairly competitive, that stung, that hurt, and I realized like maybe I'm not as gifted as this as I first thought. And by that point, though, in my college career, um, my interest had changed. I was into music a lot. So I started playing drums in a band, and music was very important to me. I was also the promoter for our band. And so marketing ended up becoming very important to me. And so building our first website, booking the tours, uh, doing all the promotion, the flyers. That ended up being like very exciting for me. And with the internet coming along around that time, I felt like I was on the cutting edge of something with that. And so that was the hobby that eventually became what I do with my career. But at the time, I didn't realize it. I just thought, oh, this is this silly sort of side thing. I've got the serious accounting career I need to kind of pursue. I was too invested though by that point in accounting to quit it and move to just marketing or moved back to engineering or something. And so I just finished out, completed everything. Um, and again, like my dad said, it did set me up for success. I did have my first job with one of the big four accounting firms, but I hated it. It was 60, 70 hours a week in a hotel in a town, 2 hours away, and just doing grunt work and not really even understanding what I was doing hardly. So I was not a good accountant. I was not a good CPA. It took me a while to even pass the exam. And so, but the pay was really strong, and I could bluff my way through most work days and just sort of get away with it and tuck away. Um, and then I transferred jobs like 4 or 5 times, and that was mostly because I would get bored or I would get sort of sick of the work environment. But frankly, it was because I just wasn't interested in the career, and so I just kept moving. And every time I would move, I would get paid more, and it was, I guess, just having that CPA, having that accounting degree, and just being maybe a likable guy, like I just kind of got me by, and it kept advancing me. I can't, when I think back on my accounting career, I can't believe that I got to where I got with it, before making the move to entrepreneurship and digital marketing and the stuff that I should have been doing all along.
Hmm. So yeah, things came easy for you when it came to that. But for a lot of people, their 20s, their early young adult years, there are some trials and some missteps. Did you experience any in your early adulthood?
So while while my career was a struggle for me personally, it was a financial success, right? I was able to get good jobs, and make decent pay, to start to pay off those student loans, those credit cards, all that stuff. Where I made the mistake is, one, not sort of trusting entrepreneurship sooner, but two, more importantly, not freeing myself up financially quicker. If I had taken these high paying jobs and then just immediately set out on a mission to become financially free within the first 3 or 4 years, I would have made the move to entrepreneurship much faster. But ultimately, it took me about 7 years to make that jump, because for the first 3 or 4 years, I floundered in my student loan debt, my car loans. Even bought a new car with another loan. Um, and just sort of let these things stick around in my life, and just made excuses for why they were there. I was single. I could have paid these things off. I could have gotten after it, but I didn't. I still didn't. Hadn't learned really how to save, and hadn't learned really how to get aggressive with paying off debt. So I floundered my first few years in my 20s with my personal finances, and but that actually ultimately led me to research it, because I was so sick of myself. Here I was, this CPA accounting student with a dad as a CPA, but I really didn't know how to manage my money. It was really frustrating and embarrassing. And I think I even had like a Roth IRA. Had like a Roth IRA, but I still had credit card debt and like high interest debt. I was still paying, and these silly student loans and these silly car loans. Um, and I just was accepting them in my life instead of seeing the idea of getting rid of those things as a way to fast track like choice and freedom and individualism, which is so important to me and has always been important to me. Um, but I figured it out. I found Dave Ramsey. I found personal finance bloggers this was back in 02, 03. And their stories, their encouragement, their education sort of was the fill in the blank for me, filled in a lot of the missing pieces. And it started giving me like more of a why for, moving forward with my money. So yeah, that was kind of the turning point was discovering these other voices who could educate me.
Did you discover them first? I know you mentioned you realized you weren't doing well with your money, but how did you know you weren't doing well with your money? Did you discover Dave Ramsey and all the other personal finance bloggers first, or was there something in you that knew you could have been doing better?
I think because I discovered those folks, it made me aware of where I was. I don't think I realized where I was until I found the other voices in the personal finance media space that could sort of separate my reality from where like a future I could see myself like being very positive. So yes, 100%. It was them. It was their voices that kind of led me to making some right choices. Obviously, with Dave Ramsey, I don't mind the aggressive tone. The hey, get off your butt, fix this situation. What are you doing? Why are you doing it this way? That's silly. I kind of like that tough guy approach. I kind of like it someone every once in a while to you know be mean to me to aggressively get me to make a move. And so that's what he did for me. He challenged me. I needed someone to do that, to talk about money to me in a way that said, okay, you can do better than what you're doing. You can do a lot better. You need to be smart about it and get rid of this stuff. And then with the personal finance bloggers I was reading at the time, um, they were just doing really cool stuff that I never, um, thought was possible. They were shooting for financial freedom like very early in their life. They were getting rid of their debt really quickly. They were starting to invest in real estate, just like things that I think the average person who goes to college and then gets a job, like they're just not exposed to that in that whole process. You're not exposed. Well, I wasn't exposed to anyone who was. I guess I was exposed to my dad, who's an entrepreneur, and so I did value that. But I didn't know how to go. I didn't even know how to go from where I was, which I felt like I needed this job for this safety and security because of the student loan debt I had to get out of it and to move forward. Like I didn't even know how to make that leap to entrepreneurship because I knew I didn't want to serve clients like my dad. So I, uh, I just didn't know where to go. And these two inputs I found myself having with Dave and the other bloggers was critical in changing my mindset and helping me see like a different future for myself, which then became very exciting. And I met my wife and sort of shared these ideas with her. She's a naturally frugal person, thankfully. And so she was on board. So once I started sort of moving toward this stuff, I found someone else who could help me move toward it even faster. And so that was kind of the next piece of the puzzle was she and I sort of aligning our forces and doing it really quick.
Yeah. What was your approach? Like, what were the things that you put in place to become better money manager?
So the first thing I really did that had the biggest impact on my finances when I was still single and still sort of in the accounting world was to automate my savings. So I created a separate savings account outside of my normal banking checking relationship not even like the same bank, but like something completely different. Online savings accounts were just popping up at the time. I believe it was ING Direct was the company that he used. They eventually became Capital One, but their ING Direct 360 account was the first savings account, online savings account that I opened up. And it was completely separate from everything I had financially in my life. And I automated a monthly transfer from my checking account. As soon as my check hit, a certain percentage of that would go over to ING Direct. And ING Direct had no, I don't even know if I had like a debit card or anything attached to it. It was just this weird online, but at the time it was weird. It's like this, what, your money is where? This online savings account somewhere off in the internets. And I just wouldn't touch that money. And it was that barrier that I needed to help me save long term. Because it would have been annoying to try to transfer that money back. It would have taken 3 or 4 days. And frankly, once I moved that money from my checking over into that separate savings account, I never really thought about it, because now I'm looking at my checking account and it was all money that I could spend. And so if I spend it down to zero at the end of the month, oh, well, that's cool, because I know I'm already savings over here. It's taken care of first. So without even thinking about it or knowing that the concept at the time, I was paying myself first. And so I was putting money aside right as soon as I got paid, and sheltering it from myself. So at that point, I realized I needed to actually like do these systems that could like almost like make money work for me automatically, and sort of beat my own psychology with money. As I shared kind of earlier, like if the money was just sitting there in the savings account and it was freely accessible and I really have a goal for it, then I would just end up spending it. And so with this money, even though I didn't necessarily have a why attached to it fully yet, it was so separate that it was able to just kind of stay over in this area. And because there was this permission involved in this, my checking account now, that there was no restriction on it. That's my checking account. As long as I don't go below zero, I can spend all that money. So I had this, I'd given myself freedom and structure at the same time. I didn't even realize it. And so that was the biggest turning point for me personally. Then I met my wife. And the biggest thing for us once we decided to get married was, hey, we need to live on one income until we're completely debt free. And so we did that for the first 2.5 years of a marriage and got rid of both our car loans, all of our credit card debt, and both of our student loans during that time by living on one income, and using using her income to do all the debt payoff, or vice versa. Maybe we lived off hers and use mine for the goals or whatever. But we're a just put it all in one pile couple, so it didn't really matter where it was coming from.
Yeah, yeah. Did you find it difficult to make that kind of lifestyle switch? I know you said she was pretty frugal, so she was okay with it, but was it a challenge for you?
It was probably a little bit of a challenge because I think at the time, uh, travel had become really important to me. Um, and it was important to my wife as well. Luckily, I could travel a little bit through my career, and so that sort of, and we were anxious to kind of buy a house together, so that was a little bit of a temptation to just kind of go out and do that, put this big down payment down. But we we just I can't, really we just kind of kept our lifestyle the same, because when you combine two incomes, you could really inflate your lifestyle, I think, living under one roof. So we just kind of kept their own, the same vehicles. We sort of kept the same spending habits, um, and just as much as possible tried to live like we were living, before we had gotten married. I think that was enough to ensure that we were, fast tracking our financial results, and also we were holding each other accountable. Um, because I had a partner in crime at this point. I had someone who had the same values and goals as me, and I was 30 when I got married, and so um, by that point in your life, you have a lot of time to think about who you want to end up with. And so I really had turned into this financial nerd, personal finance geek. And so, I knew that was a big bonus for me if I met someone who shared those same values. Um, and was not a natural spender like me. I sort of needed the yin and yang of like a frugal person attached to me to make it work. And so that was, if I had, if I had a list of things that I wanted in a wife before I met my wife, which I did sort of, frugality would have been on there. And someone who was moving toward a positive place with their money and had sort of had the scales removed from their eyes like I had, and could see like this bigger vision for their life and for what they could do with their life, career, and their money.
Hmm. So what gave you, eventually you moved on to becoming an entrepreneur full time. How did you set yourself up to make that switch?
So to set myself up to become an entrepreneur, I did a few things. First, I maintained my corporate career. In fact, I continue actually moving jobs for higher salaries and more, as much freedom as possible. So I think my last move in my corporate life was kind of a downsize from responsibility. I went from a manager back to an analyst. And it also came with a lot of travel. So it satisfied my travel bug. It had fewer responsibilities and the pay was better. This was just it was a great time for our economy here in Dallas. And so, you could sort of just pick and choose what job you wanted. Um, and so I used the next 3 years after I made that last move to set myself up for entrepreneurship. I didn't exactly know what it would be, but I kind of thought the blog that I had started would be would be a piece of that business. And sure enough, like the hobby income from the blog started growing, and ultimately it became about 30-40% of my full-time salary. um, my wife was still working a little bit, and so we had her income, we had my corporate income, and then we had the side hustle income from the blog. And all three of those combining at the end that last year, I think it was 2009, was just, I mean, we were just throwing money at savings, at debt reduction, house down payment. I mean, we just accomplished so much in that year. It was fantastic. And by the end of that year, it was looking like I could make the leap, but I wasn't quite ready to do it. I'm very risk averse type of person. So I wasn't sure if this blogging thing would have stuck around very long, or what I would do if it didn't work out. Um, there was also sort of the health insurance question. And so that was always out there. This was pre Obamacare. So there was just independent um, health insurance on the market. And it wasn't that expensive, but it was still a burden, and so it was scary. But I did research. I learned about insurance. We got rid of all of our debt, and we had our house purchased. So got that out of the way. The last piece of the puzzle was just kind of pulling trigger, and it was scary for me to do it. But kind of an interesting story. My wife wasn't necessarily fully on board with me becoming an entrepreneur right away. We had one baby at this point, and we had one on the way. And so, well, we didn't know it. And so the work was going to send me to India for 3 weeks over my first daughter's birthday. And so I was going to miss my daughter's birthday and be in India. And I told my wife about that. She goes, "Okay, now you can quit your job and be a full-time entrepreneur, because that's not happening." So I tried to get out of the trip too, but they just weren't budging. I don't know why they weren't, but that was all I needed. Just someone telling me no, I couldn't have freedom or couldn't have independence in my life. And um, pulled the trigger and became a full-time entrepreneur after that. It was scary, and there's always ups and downs, but I haven't looked back since. And it's been a fun ride to do that.
Yeah, sometimes that's just what it takes. Like you need a push out the door or something to happen to really get you to full-time entrepreneurship. So you mentioned that it was a blog that you had initially. Can you talk a little bit more about your blog and how the idea of it came about, and what you wrote about?
Sure. The idea of the blog came about because after consuming Dave Ramsey and these other personal finance blogs back in 2003, 2004, 05, I had just learned enough and was inspired enough to start having sort of my own ideas and my own story coming out of me at that point. There's a saying that you can only be a consumer for so long before you start creating yourself. And so I sort of leaned into that and had some free time at my corporate job and started piddling with the idea of having a blog. I registered the domain ptmoney.com. Philip Taylor's my full name, but folks growing up, just my buddies growing up, just call me PT. So I thought PT Money kind of sounds cool. Kind of makes me sound hip a little bit. And so I just went with that. It was a short URL too. I liked it. My first few posts were just personal stories about what was happening with me in my personal life. I was doing all kinds of stuff, throwing it out there. I think I DIY'd a home office desk. In fact, it's the same desk I'm sitting at right now. It's still around. I did like home repairs. I talked about bank bonuses, I think. Even talked about like where I was going to watch like the next UFC fight, whether I was going to pay like the pay-per-view at home or I was going to go to the restaurant and watch it there, which was like more economical. Like this is totally nerdy little topics of personal finance that I thought were interesting and at least original. But then ultimately, I think what worked best was riffing off of others in the community. So they would write about topics and I would sort of tackle that topic too, but from my own perspective. Again, I wasn't a great writer at first, but I just sort of stuck with it, mimicked the others in our community of bloggers back then. You know, this was pre-social media. So blogging back then was very social. There's lots of commenting on the sites, lots of linking to each other's articles. And so I just got to know these other nerds on the way. And these were people I had been reading and sort of absorbing their content and learning from for years. And now I was sort of on their level and one of their peers. And it was the funnest time. You know, I was anonymous at first, so I only went by PT. So none of my family or friends knew I was doing this. I certainly didn't want my boss to know I was doing it. So I was just kind of do it on the sly on the side, sharing like how much debt we had, what we were getting rid of, like all these goals we had financially. And so it was just really a blog, like a personal blog, you know. Toward the end of it, when I started trying to generate more revenue out of it, I did sort of start writing about more products and services in the personal finance space. So more banks, more brokerage accounts, things like that, how to get started investing. If you wanted to open a Roth IRA, like here's a good place to do it. Like, so I started becoming a little more commercial with the site as I wanted to turn it more into a business. But it's always sort of had that personal angle to it. Like if you go to PT Money right now and you read those articles, I mean, it's just me and, you know, talking about what's interesting to me when it comes to money and my own financial life. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I love those. Like I was mentioning off before we hit record, it's just to me, people resonate with that a lot more. So when you eventually moved and switched to become a full-time entrepreneur, what was that experience like? And thank you so much. I know we are running out of time,
no,
but
this is great.
okay, perfect.
Yeah, as long as your editor is going to be working overtime. Sorry, I'm
Yes.
all over the place.
No, this is perfect. Um, but yeah, what was that experience like? You become a full-time entrepreneur, you have responsibility, you have a family of your own. Um, yeah.
So the process of becoming a full-time entrepreneur was definitely for me, a very intimidating and scary one. Even though in my heart and my soul, I knew that's what I needed to do. I loved seeing my dad have freedom and ownership of his life, and I knew I wanted that for myself. I had seen other entrepreneurs around me. Reading these other sites and knew they were entrepreneurs at that point, so I knew it was possible. But still, there's the where the rubber meets the road is when you actually make that leap and try to depend on that. So, like any good risk averse person, I hedged my bets a little bit. So I took a editor job at a online bank. and served as their blogging editor for the first 6 months of me leaving my corporate job. So I basically started side hustling.
Okay.
I took as much freelance writing work as I could get. I had my own blog going, and I had this editor role, freelance role at one of the banks. I knew it was a short-term deal, but I knew like that would kind of sort of springboard me into doing it, just the blog. And sure enough, by October, the revenue from the blog had grown to a point to where I was comfortable just relying on that. So I let the editor job go and stopped freelancing and was just blogging full time. So I've always been a side hustler. I believe in them. I still have side hustles today. Always good to have something like that around, another iron in the fire, so to speak. Um, Health insurance, though, like I mentioned earlier, was still a big issue. We were going to have our second baby, and we were going to have this without health insurance for the first time. So that was scary. Luckily, I could do some freelance work for my dad, and he still had his CPA firm, which he had grown back to a bigger size, and they had a group health insurance plan. And so I begged my dad to let me do some tax returns for him that next spring. And so I worked for him and did a few tax returns in exchange for being on his health insurance. And then that's how we got the baby covered. Once tax season was over, that was it. So April 15th of 2011 was when I completely said bye to any other source of income except ones that I was completely generating on my own. So I struggled to do it quickly. Um, and I could I have done it, just ripped the band-aid off completely? Sure. But it made it a lot smoother for me to kind of make some of these decisions and make it a little easier to swallow as I made the transition. It was scary. I was nervous. I prayed a lot. And God provided a lot at the same time. I relied also on a lot of people in the blogging community to kind of help guide me through a lot of that as well. They were very generous with their time and resources to help me see success. They were rooting for me. Um, and then that next spring, 2011, was the spring that freed me up completely to say, you know what? I just don't need it just to have the blog here. We need to have a conference. And so that's where the idea of FinCon came along was, um, we need to do something as a community together. And so FinCon was actually born out of my freedom. So because I moved myself from corporate finance guy to free entrepreneur blogger guy, I was able to freely make the decision to start a conference, which ultimately became FinCon, which has been the bigger business that has changed my life in a bigger way, and changed the lives of a lot more folks as well, a lot of creators. And so it was that freedom from entrepreneurship that if I had never made that move, this other big opportunity would have probably never come into my life. So I'm thankful for that year of struggle. Entrepreneurship's for me, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of challenge, but it's very rewarding.
What were some lessons you learned during the year of struggle?
Lessons I learned during that year. So some of the lessons I learned being an early entrepreneur those first few years, I would say, are to rely on sort of the community of other entrepreneurs out there a little more. Initially, I was probably hesitant to ask for help or ask questions or try to get folks to share ideas or share resources. And it wasn't until I started doing that that I started seeing like larger success. And so, in fact, it was a consultant that I ended up hiring probably 3 or 4 months into becoming a solo blogger entrepreneur that was a really big part of my early success. He knew what he was doing. He'd helped some other bloggers out, and had they not been willing to sort of share that resource with me, I probably would not have the quick success as possible. So leaning on the folks that you have relationships with in your community to help you. Most other entrepreneurs want to help other entrepreneurs. And so probably asking some of those questions earlier would have got me there a little earlier. Other lessons learned are especially with the health insurance thing, it's just like, don't let the monster stay in the closet. Like, go open the door and see, go look at the monster. Like, health insurance was just this thing that I thought, this big scary thing that I couldn't conquer. And so I just avoided the topic. And if it was probably, you know, that's what kept me held down into my job the longest, you know? And so had I realized like what really health insurance costs at the time, which is really not that much, and what do babies cost if you actually just pay cash for them at the hospital and negotiate that beforehand, like those things aren't that scary if you like are willing to go down those roads and have those conversations and like study it and learn it. Instead, I just let the monster stay in the closet and was like, oh, we can't do it because we're going to have a baby and we need corporate health insurance. Like, okay, whatever, just wipe my hands of the situation instead of saying, okay, what's the reality here? Let's study this thing. Like, what's a way we could get this done? So it wasn't until I started doing that stuff that allowed me to educate myself. Yes, I did ultimately end up on my dad's plan for a few months there because we could. But the reality is that, like, you know, doing a negotiation cash for a baby birth would not have been that bad, would not have sank me or sent me back into corporate life. So, yeah, so that was another lesson. What other lessons? The last lesson I probably learned was when you create a lot of free time in your life, where you know it's you become the boss. Like it's a whole other challenge. Like deciding like how you spend your day, because there were days where I would be excited about things and jump out of bed at 6 a.m. and get work done and work all day, you know, work really hard. Then there were days where I just couldn't maintain that schedule, couldn't get anything done. Um, and so I, you know, had to, and I still struggle with this to this day, is like setting your own schedule and making sure you get the important things done first. Because a boss and a career have a way of like ensuring you get those important things done. But when it's just you and your own shop, you're the one doing the prioritizing. You're the one setting the tone for the work that gets done. And so I tend to sit and work and go deep and be analytical and sort of get lost in the work. And that's not good as an entrepreneur, because you have to take your worker hat off a lot and put on your boss hat. And so I had to learn to separate my weeks where, or at least my days, where I would spend an hour or a day for that week and be the boss, right, of the organization. So we do all the planning. We talk about where we're headed, what are our goals. And then the rest of the week or the rest of that day, if it's an hour, I'll spend actually doing the busy bee work, you know? And so learning to separate and wear both hats was another lesson I had to learn. So many lessons learned, but such a rich time and fun thing to experience in my life. Thankful
Yeah.
for it.
Yes. Yes. So how did the idea of the conference come about? Why not just like a meetup or something like that? Why did you figure the conference was the way to go?
Yeah. So I thought the conference was a good idea because I started actually going to other events, other marketing events, other finance events, and seeing these other financial bloggers there and just staying in the hallways, sitting in a couch and just talking and sharing ideas with them the whole time. And it became apparent after two or three of these events that, like, hey, we actually need sort of our version of this where it's just focused on like our content and our people and the things that we're most interested in, and bring everyone together under one space, because it was becoming apparent that like there was this little mini industry brewing of financial content creators, folks who, some were CFPs or CPAs or certified in some way, some weren't, they were just hobbyists getting out of debt and sharing their story, but either way they were like having an impact online by sharing their content. And so getting all those folks in one room seemed to resonate because, one, we're kind of a weird creature in that we're talking about a subject that's taboo. And not only are we talking about it and comfortable with it, but we're broadcasting it over the internet. So we're really weird. And so I found that I was really interested in these people because they're willing to overcome that barrier in their own life. And then also like have the confidence to start sharing that outwardly with people. So it's a special group of people who want to change the world, people who want to be so positive, and like they're also like an abundant mindset group of folks, people who think that I can share these ideas and I can put this stuff out there and we can all help each other because we know this problem is so much bigger than us individually. Like the financial illiteracy in our country and in the world is a massive problem, and it holds people back from freedom. And if more people experience freedom, there's more positivity and there's more progress in our country and across the world. So more positive things can happen. And so it's a great community to serve, and it was certainly a great community to get together. And that was apparent with my relationships with them online. I threw the idea out there in a forum and just said, "Hey guys, would you be interested in this?" Folks immediately said, "Heck yeah, sign me up as soon as you have it." I quickly built the website, built an email list. I think I put a Facebook like box on there so people could like it and their face would show up on the conference website. So I had some social proof. Went out and got a couple of the quote unquote A-list bloggers in the space and asked them, "Hey, would you kind of be a part of this and help me build this and keynote for the event? I think people would be interested in hearing from you." And those two guys thankfully said yes, they were on board. And then from there, it became a community exercise. So I got everyone on an email list and I just started asking questions like, where do you want to have it? What dates do you want to have it? What do you want to talk about? Like, do you want to volunteer, help out? What do you want to do, this piece or that piece, or how should we do this? So it really became this community built and community driven conference and idea. I had no event experience, but I had a buddy from college who at the time was serving as sort of a part-time editor for me. I had enough success with the blog where I actually hired a virtual assistant editor. And so Jessica was someone who I knew was good with events and knew good with details. And so I said, "Jessica, if I do this thing, would you mind helping me and kind of helping me the organizer a little bit?" And she said yes right away. And we were off to the races. We figured out how big conferences work. Ultimately, we didn't have but about 250 people there for that first year, but that blew my mind. I thought maybe we'd have 50, 75. Ended up having a real conference with booths and sponsors and keynotes and parties and meals and tracks. And it was really cool. We had the first one in Chicago in 2011, and we've grown ever since, with the exception of the COVID years. And it's just been a cool business to run and be a part of.
What would you say is your hope and vision for FinCon? And what my first year attending was last year. So I know what I got out of it, but what do you hope attendees, especially first time attendees or even returning attendees, what do you hope they get out of it?
So when people come to FinCon, I hope they get a few things. Certainly the sense that there are other people with the same struggles and with the same desires as them, other people in the space who are, just as passionate about personal finance as they are, folks who have maybe some similar ideas, but their own spin on it. And they can meet them in person and meet a weird friend like them. A weird, and basically have people that they call friends who then they can sort of share these ideas with and move their ideas forward. So there's that aspect. I hope they find a community. Really that's what's going to make FinCon work as a business, is if you come to the event and you meet people who become your friends. And because that's going to sell you on the idea of coming back more so than any speaker I could put on stage or any location I could pick out, or any hotel or whatever. Like none of that really matters as much as like if you perceive it as you're going to a reunion with your friends. Like you just don't miss time with your friends. You just don't miss it. And so I think as an event planner, I quickly realized my goal was to make it a gathering of like minds and gathering of like people who wanted to come back together. I also though hope I'm an entrepreneur, and the people who come to the event are entrepreneurs. And so I hope that there's real value that they get out of the event. And I'm confident that that's a component that we do offer. So we offer them an opportunity to learn, to become better content creators, to become better marketers, and become better entrepreneurs. That's our sweet spot. Whatever your medium. So if you're a blogger, you'll be a better blogger at the end of the day. You'll reach more people. You'll make more money with your blog. If you're a podcaster, same thing for you. If you're a YouTuber, same thing for you. TikTok, doesn't matter the medium necessarily. We're going to take you down that path of creating better content, reaching more people with it, or the right people with it, and then monetizing it if that's of interest to you. Some people are coaches or financial advisors, and so the monetization piece is as important. It's more about moving those folks over to clients, and that's cool too. We talk about that there as well. And then and the last thing that I hope folks get out of the event is actual relationships with financial companies. So that was big and important for me in my content, that it be paired with financial brands often so I could monetize it. And so I hope FinCon is a place where business is done. So you can actually meet banks, brokers, credit companies, all different types of financial service companies that will pair with your content. And so you can do a sponsored post campaign. You can do an affiliate marketing relationship. You can write for their site, become a freelancer for them, or vice versa, hire freelancers. So it's very much a marketplace for our industry. Lastly, I would just say, I hope our event does set a positive tone for financial education and like the future of personal finance, like growth as for the United States, and ultimately for the world. Like I that's sort of the bigger vision, is that we're all doing this. We have our individual goals of helping people, certainly, but like I know collectively we can do a lot together, and we can change the face of people and how they relate to money and how they manage it and use it and create freedom for their life. And so financial freedom is the ultimate goal for as many people as possible. That's the biggest vision I could kind of create for it, is like financial freedom for all. And I think collectively we try to do that with the event, and we can do that, I know, as a community. So it's a really big privilege to run the event and to serve this community.
For sure. I mean, there are millions of people in this country, and just one person we can't
Right.
just reach them all ourselves. So, like you said, it's a collective effort. So just last question. You talked about your story from beginning to now and the ups and downs you experienced. What advice would you give other people who are going through their own financial journeys?
So some advice for folks who may be going through their own financial journey. I would first say, be patient. You hear my story, and it's been a 15, 20-year process here for me, if not longer. And so it took a lot of time. The saying is, people, what is it, overestimate what they can do in a year, but underestimate what they can do in 10 years. And that's really been true for my story. The things that really worked for me and set me up for success were relationships, forming the positive relationships in my life, whether it was the people I was listening to, the Dave Ramsey and the bloggers, or whether it was my wife pairing up and becoming like positive with her money, or whether it was my associates, ultimately my business associates and the FinCon community. Those relationships were huge for me. So surround yourself with people who have the same vision and goals as you have and want to achieve the similar things. And it's at that point, it's hard not to have success in the long term. Heck, I stumbled a lot along the way, but just by having the peers that I had, it was like a can't miss situation. I would say secondly, like take the time, like you're going to read a lot about how to fix your finances, but that's really different from person to person. I had to sort of understand myself and what worked for me. I'm a spender, and that's okay. That just means I need to hide money from myself and sort of separate it from me. And then I still have freedom and I still feel good about my money. There's no restriction. And so understanding yourself and how you relate to money, and then hack yourself, like do the things that you need to fix your relationship with money. But don't necessarily try to change like who you are, the core of who you are. Just get to the result that you need to get to. That's more important than forcing yourself into some box. And then I would just lastly say, like, financial freedom is what it cracks up. It's cracked up to be. I mean, it really does create a positive space in your life, to allow you to have good choice and freedom to be able to make some really cool decisions and do some fun things down the road. So the sooner you start, the sooner I guess you'll get to that point. So not that I've fully achieved things, but I'm still striving in a lot of ways, but it's really fun what I get to do. Work on a couple businesses. I do a little real estate now, as well. Spend time with my kids and my family. And if I was still doing what I was doing 25 years ago in a corporate job and not necessarily liking it, I don't know that I would be the person I am today. So it's really cool to have that freedom. So I would say shoot for that as fast, get there as fast as you can.
Awesome. Can you share your name and the best way listeners can follow along with your journey and what you're teaching?
Sure. My name is Philip Taylor, and you can follow me over at ptmoney.com or at finconexpo.com. And I'm mostly teaching about side hustles these days. So side hustles have been important to me in my financial journey, and I still believe in them. And I think they can be a big part of your financial success. So if you want to learn more about side hustles, check me out.
Thank you so much, Philip. I really enjoyed this conversation with you today, and I'm sure a lot of people will get something out of our conversation as well.
Thanks for having me, Melissa. This was a blast.